I'm Jerome Marshall. In this video, we're going to be talking about how the .NET framework applies to cryptors specifically. If you're wondering why you're looking at a polar bear, it's because we don't have anything to show for you. Now, the first thing I should probably said is a little bit of background on myself. I've been around the scene for a very long time. Unfortunately, I've been around since basically the internet was invented or started, became mainstream. So I've seen a lot of changes over the years. The .NET framework came in around 1999 to 2001 is when they first started working on it. It really is a very brilliant framework for certain languages. It doesn't get a lot of credit because most of the people using it, because it's very easy to learn certain parts of it, you have a lot of amateur coders or programmers that can get into it. Now, unlike certain languages like C++ and assembly language and even Java to some extent, those languages you have to kind of know computers to begin with. You have to be somewhat smart at languages in general, where because the framework is easy to get into, you do have an influx or a large amount of amateur coders, which kind of brings down the quality of certain programs that are made on the framework in general, but that doesn't stop the powerfulness of it. Now, to give you an idea of why the framework was made, it was made specifically by Microsoft to allow programmers to make very stable, that's the key word, stable programs on Windows systems. All right. Now, one of the main things that you have to understand is a lot of people tend to make it look like C++ cryptors are going to be more stable than .NET, which is actually not very true in most circumstances. Obviously, it matters who the programmer is. But in general, if you take an average .NET program and an average C++ program, the .NET is going to be 100 times more stabler. And the reason is because the framework will handle a lot of the errors by itself, where C++, if any errors happen in that programming code, it has to be handled specifically, meaning the programmer has to type out every possible thing that can go wrong. He has to think of everything and be able to code that perfectly. So there's a lot more room for error with that. Now, the other thing that a lot of people say is .NET is not good for malware, which is true. I would agree. .NET doesn't really give you some of the powerful tools that you need to be able to compromise certain systems at system level or root access. Now, the thing that you have to remember though is malware is actually a lot different from a cryptor. A cryptor is not malware, a cryptor is a packer. Now, packers are really just compressors. They compress information and then they run it in memory, and that's what a cryptor does. Now, as far as packers go, the framework actually has a lot more tools available to it, or a lot more tools that are readily and easily available to it to be able to compress and pack and unpack files. So it actually has a lot of pros that C++ doesn't. One of those major pros that a lot of people forget, and this is once again coming from someone who's been in the scene for a very long time, C++ cryptors have been being made for a very long time, and native code in general, non-dependent code in general, has been the main thing that malware has been written in for the last 20 years. So what do you think AVs or antiviruses have the most experience in? It's going to be native code. They have the most experience in unpacking and being able to disassemble. So as far as the framework's concerned, because malware, if you want to call it that, or packers, they're relatively new in the last 4 or 5 years-ish in .NET. The AVs really haven't had a chance to catch up and be able to really understand how these types of programs work. And without getting into too many specifics, there's a lot of very fine things, very technical things with the language that enable it to do certain things that actually C++ will have a very hard time doing, or certain native languages will have a harder time doing. Now, obviously, there's certain things in C++ that are easier to do than you could in the framework, or that you can't even do in the framework. That's true for sure. But there is a lot of pros as far as the framework goes in coding certain packers. The final thing that I want to say is .NET Crypters is the execution rate, and that seems to be the thing that people really harp on is execution rates, execution rates. Well, the thing is that the framework is on every system that is not Windows XP that hasn't been updated. So that means if you have a Windows XP that's Service Pack 1 and has Windows Update turned off, you will not likely have the framework installed on your computer. Now, that could be an issue. Obviously, that could be an issue. But as far as execution rates go in malware, being someone who's been around the scene for a while, I understand that just generally, even for exploit kits, a 14% execution rate would be considered great. That would be a great execution rate for certain exploit kits. Now, cryptors are obviously a little bit different, but in the sense that .NET framework is still having an execution rate of 80%. And if you think about it, I've even heard some botnet owners say that they prefer .NET in certain aspects because it makes sure that the computer has a newer computer, which generally implies that, that person will have something of worth on their computer if it's newer and they have more money to spend, so on and so forth. So there is some certain pros and there is certainly some cons. Some of the cons that you can be is you don't be able to get full control of a computer with .NET. It doesn't really give you those tools. But as far as packers and cryptors go, you don't need to take full control of the computer because whatever you're encrypting takes full control of the computer. So it has a lot of advantages and it's very, very stable in most cases. If you want to get technical with execution rates, there's a lot of room to say that unless the person who is coding that C++ crypter is very, very good, it actually has a larger chance to fail and have a larger chance to have errors and stability issues and compatibility issues on certain computers compared to the .NET framework. Because once again, that coder has to be very, very good and has to error handle very good. So these are all different things to consider. I'm not trying to sell you into one product. It's certainly good to have a wide range of tools to be able to use, and certainly if you have a C++ crypter that's very, very well coded, which mind you is very hard to find, then sure, and go for it. But don't not consider .NET because it has a lot of advantages at the moment. The main advantage being that antivirus companies haven't had a chance to really understand how .NET framework compiled malware is being made and is being executed. So it has a lot more chances to be able to do certain things, as well as it's very much unexplored. A lot of the methods as far as C++ malware, although new things are being come up with every day, it's still, it's been around for, the C language in general has been around for 20 years, so there's not many things left to explore, where the .NET framework still has many more spots that can be explored in it. Anyways, I'll leave this video short now. Like I said, just things to consider.